This is 3.2 Polynomial Division Part 3. We're going to start with a warm-up of practicing long division again, so please write this down, give it a try, and then come back to check. It's good to keep practicing this long division technique. Alright, so x minus 1 should go on the outside. As I'm writing the other polynomial on the inside, I'm checking to make sure there's no terms missing that I'd have to put a 0 in for. And then I'm going to start the process of divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. So x cubed divided by x is x squared. Then I'm going to multiply. X squared minus 1 is negative x squared. Then I'm going to subtract, which is really adding in this case. So 6x squared, and then I'm going to bring down a negative 2x. Then I'm going to repeat that process all again. So 6x squared divided by x is 6x. And I'm going to multiply 6x squared minus 6x. So I'm going to subtract 4x minus 3. And then I'm going to start all over again. So how many times does x go into 4x? That would be 4. Then I'm going to multiply 4x minus 1. Subtract. So I get, 4 times 1 is 4. So then I'm adding, so I get a positive 1 right there. And that's my remainder. So when I put my remainder in, I'm going to say plus 1 over parentheses x minus 1. All right, so today we're going to take some of that division knowledge that we have and use it to apply some other pieces. So for instance, we know that negative 2 is a 0. We want to use synthetic division to factor the polynomial. All right, so what that's telling us is to put negative 2 in that little box that we talk about with synthetic division. So when it tells us that it's a 0, it tells us that we want to use that to divide. Then we put all of our coefficients across the top like we do normally with synthetic division. All of this synthetic division part's going to be the same. So if you haven't already, hit pause and practice doing that synthetic division and then come back. So we get a 1, multiply to get negative 2, then we add to get 1, multiply to get negative 2, add to get negative 6, multiply to get 12. And we get a remainder of 0. Now, we should get a remainder of 0 right here because they said it was a factor. So if it's a factor, you should always get a remainder of 0. It should divide evenly. All right, so then last time we talked about how to change that into a polynomial itself. It was a cubic. We go down 1 degree to a quadratic. X squared plus x minus 6. And then that's where we stopped last time. But this time it wants us to factor the whole polynomial. So we need to take that answer that we got and factor it. So what multiplies to get negative 6 and adds to get 1? That would be 3 and negative 2. So we have x plus 3 times x minus 2. And then these are just the factors for the quadratic, but we need the factors for the whole cubic. So we have to include this 1 from the very beginning, which would be a factor of x plus 2. So if that doesn't quite make sense, or where we got this x plus 2, if you think back to what we did on day 2, remember how we had to set the factors equal to 0 and solve? So if we set x plus 2 equal to 0, we would get a negative 2. So it's kind of the opposite of what we were doing last time. But this factorization here is what you would get if you factored that cubic there. So you can see how you would need 3 x's to get an x cubed. And we could multiply all of this out to get this cubic here. Okay, let's try that again so we can kind of solidify what we're doing. So see if you can get started with this one. They gave us x equals 2, so that's what's going to go in your little box. Set up your synthetic division and see how far you can get, and then come back and check. So we have 2 that goes in, coefficients go across the top, checking to see if there's any terms missing that I might need to put a 0 in for, but there's not. Drop down my leading coefficient, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add. And again, I got a 0 right here, which is good. That means I did it correctly, because if you have a factor, it should always be 0 there. All right, now this was a quartic to the 4th power. So that means to go down 1, this better be a cubic. So when I rewrite it, I'm going to have x cubed plus 3x squared minus 4x minus 12. And I have to factor that. So when we have 4 terms, we factor by grouping. So I'm going to group these first 2 together and find out that x squared is common. And then group the second 2 together. And -4 is what's common. So we factor to x plus 3 times x squared minus 4. Now remember, just like last time, we have to pull in, what we divided by, this x plus 2 up here. So we have an additional x minus 2. Now there's one other thing that we're not quite done with yet. X squared minus 4 factors even more. So we have x plus 3, and then x plus 2, x minus 2 from the x minus 4, and then an additional x minus 2. Now if you ever have factors that are the same, you want to combine them with exponents. So we would have x plus 3, x plus 2, and then x minus 2 squared. And that would be the complete factorization of that original polynomial using synthetic division.